Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving right into a pretty dark history today, the history of fiat currency. We're unpacking the documented evidence behind a really chilling assertion from our source material, that every single fiat currency ever created eventually collapses. This source opens with a very stark, undeniable reality. And the claim isn't just that most fiat currencies have failed, it's that absolutely all of them have failed. Every single one. This isn't about fear-mongering. It's simply about looking backward at the objective historical record and seeing a pattern that repeats itself over and over and over again. To put that sweeping statement into perspective, let's look at the actual math. The data tracks exactly 775 dead currencies throughout recorded history. 775 currencies that were printed, circulated, relied upon by everyday people, and eventually became completely, utterly worthless. There are literally zero exceptions to this rule in the historical record. To understand why this inevitably happens, we first have to define what a fiat currency actually is. Fiat literally translates to by decree. That means the paper money in your wallet has value only because the government declares that it does. It's not backed by gold, it's not backed by silver, it's not backed by anything tangible at all. It is backed entirely by a promise and by the collective belief of the people using it. And the moment that people stop believing in that promise, well, the currency dies. So how does this actually build into a collapse? The source outlines an identical, repeating six-step spiral of death for these currencies. It almost always begins at step 1. A government needs more money than it can collect in taxes, so it decides to fire up the printing press. That newly printed currency chases the same amount of goods, causing step 2. Prices rise. As prices rise, step 3 triggers. Confidence in the currency falls. This leads directly to step 4, where people rush to spend their money before it loses even more value. That desperate rush causes step 5, hyperinflation, which mathematically guarantees step 6, total collapse. Part 1, History's Warning Signs. Let's impartially walk through the evidence. So what does this collapse spiral actually look like in the real world? Let's start our journey in ancient Rome. Back in 264 AD, the Roman denarius was a solid, glowing coin made of 90% pure silver. But as the empire expanded and needed more money, they began debasing the coin. Fast forward to 300 AD, and it contained just 5% silver, packed with 95% cheap metal. The citizens still called it by the same name, but its purchasing power had completely evaporated year after year, which ultimately contributed to the fall of the empire itself. Now let's fast forward to Weimar Germany. After World War I, the German government owed absolutely impossible war reparations, and their solution was to massively print money. In January of 1921, $1 bought 90 German marks. By November of 1923, less than 3 years later, that exact same US dollar bought 4.2 trillion marks. The government mathematically destroyed their own currency in an incredibly short window of time. And this brilliantly illustrates the human cost of that mathematical destruction. The resulting hyperinflation wiped out middle-class savings completely. It reached a point where people literally burned their currency in their fireplaces for heat just because the paper was cheaper than buying firewood. Workers had to demand to be paid twice a day, rushing out on their lunch breaks to buy groceries because prices on the store shelves were literally doubling every few hours. Next up, the source points us to a much more recent example, Zimbabwe, between the years of 2007 and 2009. The government there, again, printed money to pay off its debts and triggered an unbelievable, almost incomprehensible inflation rate of 89.7 sextillion%. At the height of this crisis, things became completely absurd. The government actually printed a single $100 trillion note. Now, today, that's a popular novelty item sold to tourists and collectors, but back then, that massive sum of money could only buy you 3 eggs at the market. People were carrying their cash in literal garbage bags just to buy a loaf of bread. ATMs ran out of cash within minutes. Farmers abandoned their crops, and the entire economy was functionally destroyed in just 24 months. Finally, we look at modern Venezuela. Prior to 2016, this was a highly prosperous, oil-rich nation. But, repeating the historical pattern, the government began relentlessly printing money to fund social programs. By 2018, inflation hit 1 million%. Grocery stores' shelves were left completely empty. The situation became so inverted that highly qualified engineers and doctors became taxi drivers, just so they could earn tips in US dollars, which were worth far more than their monthly professional salaries in the local currency. Part 2. The US dollar. Are we the next collapse? We've looked at 4 different centuries and 4 different countries with the exact same pattern. Which brings us to the present day. We are simply reporting the source's observation here. This identical historical pattern is now playing out with the US dollar. Since moving off the gold standard and becoming entirely fiat in 1971, the dollar has steadily lost 85% of its purchasing power. It is 52 years into this exact trajectory. It's just at an earlier stage of the collapse spiral compared to Weimar or Zimbabwe. Part 3. Assets that always survive. How do we weather the storm? If paper money is designed by its very nature to eventually fail, how did people survive when their currency went to zero? Well, the first most proven lesson across all of human history is that hard assets, specifically gold, survive. Gold has stood firm as a reliable form of money for over 5,000 years. It was there when Rome fell, it was there when Weimar collapsed, it was there through Zimbabwe's hyperinflation. Hundreds of competing paper currencies have completely disappeared from the face of the earth, yet gold has remained a constant store of value. Synthesizing the historical data, the source cleanly lists 4 things that actively hold their value when paper fiat fails. First, as we just saw, are hard assets like gold. Second is land and productive assets, because during a collapse, a farm still produces food and a solid business still provides value. Third is foreign hard currency, allowing citizens a temporary lifeboat. And fourth is a modern fixed supply hedge like cryptocurrency. To elaborate a bit more on that crypto aspect, the source specifically highlights Bitcoin. Because it has an unchangeable, hard-coded limit of 21 million coins, governments simply cannot print more of it to inflate its value away. We saw a real-world example of this during the Turkish lira's massive collapse in 2021, where the rapid devaluation of the local fiat currency drove explosive overnight adoption of Bitcoin as citizens desperately sought a safe haven. Part 4. The necessary mindset shift. Rethinking your money. Understanding these patterns requires a major shift in how we view our money. The citizens of Rome, of Weimar Germany, of Zimbabwe, and of Venezuela didn't see the collapse coming. And it wasn't because they were foolish, it was because they trusted a system that was fundamentally flawed from the start. As the source notes, every single generation believes that their currency is somehow different, and every generation is eventually proven wrong. The core takeaway here for you, the viewer, is really a matter of strategy. Simply hoping that your government will be fiscally responsible is not an actual financial strategy. History shows us that blind hope leads to wiped out savings. But acknowledging the historical pattern of those 775 failed currencies and actively positioning yourself in hard, productive assets, that is a strategy based on reality. So we leave you with this final provocative thought from the source material. Knowing what you know now about the undeniable, repeating cycle of fiat currency, which side of history do you want to be on? Will you be someone who learns from the dead currencies and recognizes the pattern before it reaches the end of the spiral, or will you be someone who trusts the system blindly and wishes they had prepared? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.